Every day there is a forgetting, and every moment there is the possibility of remembering. Remembering who you truly are, awakening to your body, to the inner world and experience of being alive. Here is where you find the beauty, the joy. Here is where you free your soma.
Hello, and welcome to the Free Your Soma podcast, stories of somatic awakening and how to live from the inside out. Today, I have Mary Van Geffen. She is an international parenting coach for moms of spicy ones, and she helps out people who are highly competent in life, but overwhelmed by motherhood, lean into the spiritual discipline of staying calm and cultivating warmth and tenderness, all while trying to wrangle fiery future CEOs. This often requires skill building in the realm of self-compassion. She offers online courses and hour-long classes to help moms gain confidence to choose gentle, respectful parenting, especially if they weren't raised that way. Mary is a certified Simplicity parenting counselor and professional co-active coach. And today she's bringing her life coaching and teaching skills to our podcast. So welcome, Mary. I'm excited to have you on.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here too.
Wonderful. Yes, I've been following you for a while on Instagram, and I got to say, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk with you is because you really blend a lot of fun and play with really important conversations about what people are experiencing in their day-to-day lives with their children, and really useful ways to start reorienting towards a more gentle approach to parenting. So I just really love that you do that. You combine this knowledge with a sense of fun and play.
Well,
So
thank you for seeing that. I just heard, I was just listening to, there's a whole new U2 album where it goes along with Bono's new book. And that dates me. I know some of your listeners don't know who I'm talking about, but there's this song called Beautiful Day. And in it is the gorgeous quote that play is the evidence of freedom. And I really think that that's one of it's like when there is a thawing of the snow and the crocus comes out, that some evidence that we are doing really good soma work, somatic healing, is that we begin to see ourselves being more playful. So
yeah.
Thank you for noticing that.
Yeah, well, play is something that I think happens. Creativity is something that happens when we're out of fight or flight, right? It doesn't really happen when we're just focused on surviving.
Yes.
Yes. And so tell us a little bit about kind of, your background. How did you get into this style of, being a parenting expert and all this stuff that you're doing? Like, there must be a kind of why around this that you can tell our listeners about your story and how this came about.
Yeah, my why of how I became a parenting expert is because I was completely a newbie and didn't know what I was doing when I became a parent. And that, that's 18 years ago. But I just realized very quickly after my child went through the stage of just being this beautiful little baby that people would stop me on the street, that as soon as she began to develop a will and an awareness of her autonomy, I was suddenly triggered and acting out and struggling and really making her wrong. I had lots of stories I could have told you if you came across me when I had a 4 and a 2-year-old, of how my 4-year-old was on the path to be, a psychopath of some sort. And I really, I was just struggling. And so I went on a quest to get her diagnosed with something. And took her to a play therapist where they said, okay, thank you. We've met with her a couple of times. Could you come by yourself next week? And I thought that would be like where we'd begin brainstorming of how to get her the support she needed and fix her. And instead, this therapist said, could you come back next week and the next week? And for 2 years, every week, it was mama going to the therapist. It was not the child who had an issue. And so I did that work and then just started plunging into, wow, I didn't realize kind of that I was raised in a way that I don't want to replicate. And so once you become really articulate on what has happened to you when you were little, or what it was like for you to be little, the scales are off, and you start stopping a lot of patterns. But then what do you replace those patterns with? So then I began taking courses and got certified as a coach, and did a lot of work with simplicity parenting. And for 11 years now, I have been coaching moms one-on-one. And over the last couple of years, I've shifted to more creating curriculum, online classes that like immediately get you up to speed. A lot like for beginners, like I have how to get calm in an hour. And people are always like, is this good for when your child's in preschool, or is this going to be good if my kid's a teenager? And the secret has nothing to do with the age of your child. I mean, you might be specifically triggered by certain stages and where you had issues as a child, where you struggled. But in general, getting to calm is not about the other person. And so helping folks really take responsibility for their own self-regulation is important to me, because my own mother struggled to do that. And sort of, if she was upset, she made it about what the child was doing, and she was unsupported. And I have a lot of support.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that is such a tremendous journey, because you found somebody who could actually help you. Chances are like what you suspected, or thinking that, someone's going to come and give your child a diagnosis and maybe, all that stuff. Like maybe you could have found a doctor or someone kind of outdated in their approach who would have done that. But instead you found this like wonderful person who actually initiated you in a whole new way of being, right? Not only in parenting, I'm assuming it affected other areas of your
Oh
life.
yeah, my marriage, how I show up in friendships. I mean, when you become aware of the mother wound, everything changes because you have new glasses on. I will say that, yeah, there's a lot of bad practitioners out there. I went to the first therapist I ever went to. I was brave enough to go for myself before I went and tried to get her diagnosed. And this sweet little old lady, she was almost, I mean, she seemed so maternal. And she listened to my story and she said, "Sweetie, have you tried spanking yet?" That was this mental health advocate's suggestion for me to get this child in line. And so you will get a lot of bad advice along the way. And that's unfortunate, because that sort of adds to the trauma.
Totally. Well, I think, those methods are becoming more and more outdated. There's just so much data that shows that that's actually not effective, and that can produce, distance and damage the relationship between you and your child, and all that, all the different research that's out there that sort of advocates for a more gentle approach to parenting than most of us probably experienced growing up, than was kind of the classical standard. And I'm sure that what you kind of described before, where the age that you were when the stuff happened with your parents is probably the age where you're going to be particularly triggered by your child's behavior. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's called a new remembering context. And it whooped my butt because here I am using violent metaphors, but I thought I'd already done therapy in my 20s, and I had learned, oh, my parents were alcoholic and drug users, and the implications, and I figured that all out. And then I had this child, and I didn't like this child. I, in fact, would whisper that I hated them in some level and didn't want to, I would never choose to be with this person, right? And it was through, conversations with my therapist that I realized that I had never been 4 again. And you are, your body is becoming that same age, because here you are wrapped up in this intimate physical relationship with a being that is an age you haven't been for many years, right? So you are again experiencing, or at least your body is unconsciously experiencing, what it's like to be 4, what it's like to be 5. And so you kind of don't know when something's going to flare up. Like I've been coasting now probably from 8 to 13 to 14, and then I forgot what it was like to be a teenager, and how sort of ostracized and rejected I felt for a lot of my very risky behavior at the time. So there's more healing to be done. That's the bummer. Therapy's never like one and done.
Yes, I feel you on that. I went through a lot of, shifting when I was in my 20s, and I started actually therapy luckily when I was in my teens, because I just like knew that I had some stuff to work through. But since I've become a mother, I feel like the what you're describing, I feel like it kind of works the other way too, where when I was a little girl, right, I was experiencing my parents, and little children are so perceptive and they really like feel into, well, I at least was, I was feeling into the things that were going on with my mother. And so as I've been raising a 4-year-old, I'm getting that same experience you just described, where like I'm being 4 again, but I'm also being who my mother was when I was 4. What were the things that were going on in my mother when I was 4? And that's been a real trip. Because it's like I'm living like a double identity of being like myself and also being like reliving some aspect of my mother that I experienced at that age that my son
Yes,
is.
and intuitively, we can pick up non-verbally sort of the through line that's happening in the thoughts of our mother, and then we start experiencing them. Like that was with me. I would be looking at my daughter saying, she's so bossy, she's so dramatic, so sensitive. Well, that's because those exact same things were said and thought about me at that time. And so I was just like rehashing a worn out script that really wasn't mine to read.
That's so powerful that you shifted these things, and you've done a lot of like digging, it sounds like, to really shift them, and you're able to just talk about it so frankly, which I love, because
Yes, and I mean, it's a journey that you keep recommitting to. Just the other day, I was angry with my 16-year-old son. Um, maybe he didn't take out the trash, or I think he's really into like, yeah, I'll get to it. Yeah, soon. And so things don't happen. And I was very irritated about it. And he said, "Bye, Mom." And I had this split second where my instinct was to say nothing as I walked out the door, to punish by withholding my affection. He actually said, "Bye, I love you." And my instinct was to give him the silent treatment. And it would have been so easy. And in that moment, I was like, wait a second, both can exist. I can continue to show love and affection and disagree with his behavior and even be frustrated and kind of heightened physically by it. And so I said, "I love you too. Have a good day." And I went and got in the car, and I was so dang proud of myself because that cycle has stopped. We don't give the silent treatment and make somebody beg for love on some level when they disappoint us in my new family.
Yeah, that's powerful. I love that. It's like the 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 era of kind of like punishment as the form of correction, right? Because there's other ways to correct, like besides punishing somebody with a silent treatment or with physical violence, right? There's other ways to help people reorient themselves to what's happening. And especially with children, would you talk about a little bit of the ways that you communicate with your children, or you help parents communicate with their children when they're sort of stuck in this old paradigm of like, I have to punish, I have to like scold, I have to demand?
Yeah, and that is an old paradigm where there's this, and we don't even know we believe it. It's like almost worth writing down if you're listening to this, that like for a lesson to stick, it needs to hurt. There has to be some level of pain in this for it to make an impact. And that is so not true. I mean, we know that when we are in duress or pain or feeling shame, that we are in a different section of our brain. We're flooded. We're in fight or flight. We're not thinking clearly. So we're sure as heck not learning the very lesson that's important to our parent. So I think really understanding that that's a fallacy, that actually people learn quicker and better through fun and play and silliness. That's actually how we learn best as humans. And then also that punishment is about, it doesn't teach anything. So I'll say that really real discipline comes from the idea of discipling, and to disciple is to teach. So if we could kind of move away from how do I get them to stop doing this thing? What's the consequence? That's like the number one question people want to ask me. Like I've gotten on podcasts where it's like, great, I've got a list here. Could you tell me what the consequence would be for each of these things? And I really, bum that person out, because instead tell me the skill you're trying to teach. And let's figure out a curriculum or a way of being, a way to model that, a way to prepare that child ahead of time, a way to reinforce it. Yeah. And that requires a different language of the brain, because we often know what we don't want. No, don't do that. Not that. Stop that. But it takes like a pausing and being like, what do I want? And these little concrete, dreamy, sensitive individuals really need us to paint a picture. I mean, parenting is leadership, and a good leader takes a moment to describe what they want. So instead of don't hit your sister, it is your sister needs space. Give your sister her full bubble, even if you're angry, or write down in your angriest voice what you want from your sister, but we're not going to touch her body. So coming up with like, what is the yes? And clearly naming it, because then you've created this word picture for the child that they could move towards, and that is teaching them, versus don't do this. Like, don't you dare think about me getting my hair washed by Jason Momoa, and it's not going to be hot, sudsy water. It's like, that's immediately where your brain goes. So our kids they really need us to create word pictures of the yes.
That makes so much sense, because a lot of what you're saying, I think, applies to every human being. Like if I say, like you just said, don't think of a pink elephant, the more that we focus on what we don't want, we kind of like bring more energy to that thing,
Yeah,
right?
and we find it. Like, it's so important, the questions we're asking. If the question is, what's my son going to do to piss me off today? Or how am I going to, where am I going to see my son being lazy yet again? So you will find it. But if the question is, how can I find moments of connection? How can I pour into my son today? How can I let my son know that I love him as is, so that I then might have some influence over him later? But you have to connect before you get to direct.
That's beautiful. Yes, I totally agree with you on that. So tell us a little bit more about, kind of this shift from dysregulated parenting, which is I kind of think like a lot of us experienced, because, there just wasn't as much information out there about how our nervous system works, how our bodies work. A lot of people have spent a lot of their lives living in fight or flight, right? And maybe they were raised by parents who were in fight or flight, right? So this kind of move from dysregulated parenting into a new paradigm where the parent is taking responsibility for themselves first, right? And then they're actually directing or leading their children in a way that's effective. So kind of, if you could talk a little bit about that shift and how that looks like kind of real time in some of your classes or programs, that you're getting people out of a dysregulated state into a more calm place where they can actually do that higher functioning thing of teach.
Yeah. And I'm not the one getting them, just to be clear. I'm teaching like like in my calm class, it's coming up with your own calm down recipe that has like 4 parts to it, and doing the thinking ahead of time and the visualization, so that when the S hits the fan, you actually have a plan to get calm. So I love what you're saying, that we're shifting towards parents having responsibility for themselves. So, and it's really hard because the world is like burning, and I hate to be negative, and that's some of my Enneagram 4 despondency that I just bring to the world, but so much is happening that is overwhelming, and I don't need to list it all out. So it's, while we are making the shift philosophically to really check in with our regulation, we're the toads in the boiling water that started off cool, and the world is more and more dysregulating. There's more coming at us, more things to sift through. So in some ways it can feel like I'm tending this little patch of green grass, and behind me is a cataclysmic cliff opening up, and and swallowing up everything. So there's a lot stacked against parents, I just want to say. So if you have a hard time getting to calm, I bet there's good reasons. I bet you are transitioning so fast. A lot of lack of calm comes from being time starved. And like, we've got to get out the door, right? I don't want to lose my job. I need to get this kid to school. And it is really hard to be regulated in that. And then we're sending sort of this shockwave out to our child. There's no way our child's going to be calm if we're not. So a lot of times people are like, okay, you got to help me get this child to calm. And I'm picking up from them being sort of an empath I'm seeing that they are not calm. They're talking a mile a minute. They're not breathing. Their belly is clenched. Their jaw is clenched. Their hands are tight. We start with them. So ask me maybe a more specific question, and I'd love to share.
I guess, you kind of answered it. You have them come up with their own recipe. And I think that's brilliant because everybody's nervous system is different. And what's calming for one person might not be as calming for another.
Oh, yes. Can I give an example of that?
Sure. Yeah.
And maybe we could do it together. I have a 1 minute meditation that comes from the work of positive intelligence. I'm sure Zad Sharmin. And are you familiar with him?
Not really. No, not.
It's cool. It's about like breaking your thought patterns into 9 ways we sabotage ourselves. And so I use it in my coaching. But this 1 minute meditation is so soothing to, I would say, 90% of the people I work with, but there'll be 10% who's like, this feels gross. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. You're part of that where this doesn't feel good. So we'll try it. Do you have 1 minute? And then I can tell you how we would alter it for somebody who's like, ugh.
Yeah.
So I want you to put anything down that you have in your hands. And because we're going to use your hands, and I want you to bring your awareness to your feet and where they are on the ground or on the seat. I want you to notice that your bottom is fully supported by whatever your seat is. And just sort of ground yourself in that. And I want you to bring your breath long and soft, just being aware of it. Don't need to alter it at all. And now we're going to look at our hands with your eyes open. I want you to begin to drag the fingers of one hand across the palm and fingers of the other hand, going slower than you might want to, and bringing all of your awareness to just the sensation of skin dragging across skin. Like you have never done this before. Some other thoughts come in, like, what is this? And you just let them go right by and bring your brain back to this assignment, which is we're just feeling every ridge and wrinkle of our palms and our fingers. And now you realize you stopped thinking about it. You just recommand your brain. Come back to this moment, to these fingers. You might bring your hand slowly up to your ear as you're moving back and forth. Now we've got 2 sensations of our body. Got the sound. You can hear almost like the whisper of skin dragging across skin. You've got the sensations in your fingers and your hands, and you can see the back of your hand. It's kind of blurry for me because I'm old. Now breathe out. How was that for you, Aimee?
Oh, I loved that. That's lovely.
Okay, there are some people who are like, oh, why don't you tell me to get moisturizer first? Or that just feels so like skeevy. I just don't like it. And so for them, I might have them squeeze with one hand the wrist of the other hand, and then slowly squeeze slightly above that. Squeeze and release. Now you're up all the way to the elbow. You go all the way up to the shoulder. Squeeze and release. So it's a firm touch and a firm release versus this slow dragging thing that's really gross for some people. That's just to give an example of what you're saying, that every single body is different, let alone the different traumas and the exposure we've had and the ideas and metaphors we're working with. So really being open to how one person calms down is not the same as how another does. But the unifying, consistent, universal thing is it involves a pause.
Mm-hmm.
It involves a 3 to 30 second like time stop, which means you aren't being productive in as far as the world can see. You're not putting somebody's shoes on, you're not helping them into the car seat, but you are pausing and checking in with yourself and assessing and noticing and really showing up for yourself. And a lot of times people are like, yeah, but what do I say to the kid? Because now they're freaking out, or what do I do in a meltdown? And it's always, you start with this, the best instrument you have in parenting, which is your body, and checking in with where is it at? Is it in it? Is it even in a place to be imparting any kind of wisdom to anybody? because often it's sending off these alarms that are saying, this is an emergency, this is an emergency. If we really looked at the situation, it's not an emergency, but our body, you know, our vagus nerve are going all these packets of data telling our brain that we are in a war, and we're not. So the pause would be like the biggest tip. And you can warn your people, customer service levels are going to decline significantly because I'm going to be pausing. I'm going to be taking a moment. And it might look like mom is glitched. I mean, my teenagers are like, what's the answer? And I'm like, ooh, hold on a second. I'm just checking in. And, you know, if it's a now answer, the answer is no. But if you'll give me a moment, and really just, that's one of the beauties of parenting, that it's this spiritual discipline that forces us to get back in touch with our body, our youngest self, our soul. Like there's just, you can't do this well and be ignoring your own self. I recently, you know, interrupt me if you have a question, because I'm free associating here.
Well, I was just thinking about the power of that exercise that you showed us with, you know, even adjusting it with the pressure for squeezing for someone who has a sensory issue with the sliding and the sound and all that, right? That's promoting lateralization of our brain. So I don't know if they taught you that about this, but
No, tell me more.
yes. So what you just had me do with my hands or with squeezing, right? We're actually getting our brain to do like an infinity symbol, right? Which is your right and left hemisphere are working together. And that's how we can best be present with our emotions while problem solving. And a lot of times when people get stressed, they hop into one hemisphere and just stay over there, and then hop into the other hemisphere. And there's not this cross brain pattern going on. So they're either overly analytical and they don't have a connection to their feelings, or they're like super emotional and they don't have the skills to like problem solve and be analytical. They're like one or the other, kind of, you know, intense. Yep. So this is this pausing and then doing this physical movement, this somatic approach to bringing both parts of their brain back online is literally, in my view, a way that you're inviting people to experience all of who they are instead of just whatever's happening when they're in panic mode. This is where they can access their wisdom. This is where they can access their skill to deliver the right thing to say, you know, that is actually going to make the situation, whatever it is, resolve in a more pleasant way. So I think it's really powerful. I just want to say I love that. And
yeah, and for some people it looks like bilateral, like crossing with your hands, and for others it might look like havening. And there's all different ways of getting, I love what you're saying though, to get the whole brain involved, start communicating. Yeah, and let some of your wisdom sort of bubble up before you just lash out and react.
Totally. Yes, I'm going to use that. I'm definitely using that technique because I love it so much. And then, you know, as someone who's kind of, I would say, like leading the way in this gentle parenting approach, what do you think are some of the major benefits that you see children and their parents getting to experience when they start practicing this way of being versus how things have been going? Like maybe you can just tell us a little bit about the results that people get.
Well, one of them is joy. I mean, there's no joy in being a prison warden who's really disappointed in your convicts. And that's sort of the metaphor that a lot of people are working under, of like, it's my job to control this person and to get a certain output from them. And so it really robs you of the joy, and it makes the stakes seem so high. And so, you know, after, and there are 4 stages of learning, right? The first is unconscious incompetence, where you have no idea that you're not gentle. You're just like, come on, what's wrong with you? And you don't understand why you're not getting good results, right? Then there's conscious incompetence. And so it hurts. It doesn't feel good to realize, wow, this doesn't come easy. I don't really know what I'm doing. I know I want to be this gentle, respectful parent, and that's not who I'm being. So I guess I want to validate that some of the results in the beginning are like, I feel like crap. Is it too late? Did I mess this up? I don't know how to do this. And anytime we're taking on a new skill, the brain is sending lots of stress hormones to say, no, we do macros. When we see this, we think this. When we think this, we feel this. And when we feel this, we do this. What are you doing? Don't change the the programming, because it's trying to save calories, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there are parts of becoming a gentle parenting that just are fatiguing for a while until it becomes second nature, until you move through the other phases of learning where you become very consciously competent. If I do everything just right, if I pause like that lady said to, and I go in and I access my calm down recipe, I can do this. But whew, I'm tired at the end of the day. But eventually you get to this unconscious competence where, you know what? I haven't thought about yelling in a year. Wow, I don't yell anymore. I'm not a person that yells. So I want to say that. And then the long-term benefits are this you have a relationship where this child becomes an adult and you're their favorite person. They want to be around you. They trust you. They want you to influence their life. And that's what I'm seeing now that I have an 18-year-old. I'm seeing her talking about friends whose parents were different, who are maybe coming from a much more anxious attachment, or just in a more judgmental framework. And they're hiding so much of themselves from that parent. And so one of the beauties of gentle, respectful, I mean, we could call it conscious parenting, we could call it compassionate parenting, intentional. There's so many ways to look at it, but this new way of being is creating safe, longer term relationships that you want to stay in, that become like your secret weapon, because you have this parent who's willing to process things with you and to see all of you. And I think it's really helping mental health. And it's really tough. It's hard to do.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the rewards are tremendous, and worthwhile in terms of the big picture of what I think most people want, at the end of the day, is to have that level of confidence and influence with their child as their child's becoming an adult, to be kind of, in some ways they want to be able to like protect them from the dangers of the world and from the things that are going to happen that are going to throw them off course, or, drop them to their knees. Like, I think a lot of parents, they want to be able to be that for their kid, but if they don't have that foundation of trust, if they have some kind of adversarial relationship, that would be a grief of a lifetime to feel that you don't have that with your kid when it's something that you want, right?
Yeah. And with gentle parenting, I think sometimes there's this fallacy that it's like, oh, okay, you do what you want to do. And that's permissive parenting. That's not
Right.
what we're talking about. So there is a lot of big emotion. There's a lot of limit setting, and there's a lot of allowing your child to fail when they're still with you, so that they can build up that resiliency that you're talking about, and be able to not crumble when they get to college and can't figure something out. So it's yeah, I just want to say it's not permissive parenting.
Right. Yeah. And it sounds like in so many ways, you're not promoting that people be rescuing their kids from the experiences that their kids are going to have, but how do they continue to do the self-responsibility and be the person that their kid can come home to, right? When whatever happens, happens.
Yeah, and when kids are younger, I even find people being like, how do I help him be okay with a limit because he just goes berserk? And I can intuit that folks are walking on eggshells, trying to, how do we not let this kid blow up? And I would actually say, get to that limit way sooner. Let that kid blow up. Get to the point where he can become so dysregulated. He's looking for that anyway. It's not usually about that limit. It's about his container of what he can take on and cope with is just about to overflow. And you can kind of tell when you're with a child that's moving into dysregulation. And so sometimes the best thing you can do is have a firm limit where they can move past the bargaining and go to the grief, to lose themselves while you stay grounded and are working on your own regulation. So they have yet another experience of losing it while you stay calm. And that is wiring their brain through all the mirror neurons that we have.
Wow. I love that. I'm going to be thinking about that all week with my 4-year-old.
Good.
Because I do that thing where I'm like trying to keep him from going over the edge, and it doesn't usually work out that well.
Unless you're just trying to get him to nap time, which I respect.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, it's like I feel what you're saying really makes sense in terms of letting him be fully expressed, and how do I like just put some earplugs in if it's really hurting my ears and stay like super calm.
Yeah, earplugs are really important if you are a highly sensitive person. And there's no shame in protecting, and that allows you to, I think, be more available for your child when you're protecting your own body.
I love that. Thank you. So you have some really great offerings coming up and some things that you're going to be doing in April.
Yes, Moms of Spicy Ones is back, and this is my group program. It's 8 weeks long, and the cart opens on April 12th. And this is where you find your people. If you have a child who is intense and inflexible and has a fierce drive for independence and strong emotions and can negotiate with adults, it's you kind of know if you have a spicy one. If you're not sure, it's probably not for you. But all these techniques and self-development that I teach is obviously works with a mild child, but this course is really best for somebody who has a hard to parent child. And we kind of look at what makes it hard. Is it totally them, or is part of it you? And what do we need to shift perspective wise and skill wise and communication skills specifically? So if that sounds interesting, I would love to give your audience $50 off. The course is $4.99, and we'll make a special coupon, and the code will be SOMA, SOMA, if you would like to join. Love to see you in there.
That would be awesome. Yeah, thank you. So you guys look for that if you're listening in your car and you can't write it down. It'll be in the show notes along with a link to the website where you can read about it and sign up. That's fantastic. I think I've seen this in your content. I just want to verify it. Do you identify as a spicy one? Were you a spicy child?
Yes, I was. I still am. I'm a goofball. I'm neuro atypical, and that with my ADHD. And spicy kids don't have to have a diagnosis whatsoever. But yes, I was hard to parent, and probably hard to be married to until we figured out like our beautiful dance now. But yeah, I'm spicy.
Nice. Yeah. And I mean, there's got to be, as you said, kind of we said in the intro, they're, fiery future CEOs, like these attitude problems or these issues that these children are having where they're so fiercely independent and so strong-willed. Like we think of that as like a negative thing when we're trying to parent them, but those attributes can actually be things that are really powerful and beautiful if they're developed properly and not dysfunctional, right?
Completely. The most successful and world-changing adults are really hard to control as children, because they come out of the womb ready to be in charge, just without any experience yet. So yes, these are the hardest people to parent, are the activists and the world changers and the future CEOs. And we need to help. My big mission is that they would grow up not feeling wrong, because that delays their ability to give back to the world.
Yes, yes. I think that, I identify also as a spicy one. And from what I hear from my mother, and it's interesting, just like this conversation and thinking back on that, like mother wound and that relationship, and, how these things really are probably quite generational as well. Like the things that went on with her mother when she was a baby and get passed on, down the line to me. And then, as you're speaking of, we have the ability to kind of stop this pattern from continuing with our own children. And that's a benefit to the world, because as you said, like these are the future leaders. These are the people who will not be controlled, who will not just be, the mill of the masses, who will actually be thought leaders like you, moving things forward. And so if we can shift how we're perceiving that and give our children more grace, right? This
Yeah.
is huge. This is a really big, wonderful thing that you're doing.
Thank you. My mission is that everyone would figure out how they can stay calm, kind, but also firm with these spicy ones, because they do need boundaries. But it's like an art, because nobody can come in and say, oh, always do this, because it's a calculation that a parent of a spicy one has to make each time, of like, is this limit worth it? There will be bloodshed, and there will be audio terrorism happening. So is this the time to hold that boundary? Yes, it is. Whereas there might be another time where it's not. And so moms of spicy ones get a lot of judgment from outside because people don't understand the energy taxation and the repercussions. And so it really is, no one understands it but them.
That makes sense. And, in the somatic work that I do, we're always talking about like meeting the energy with like the appropriate amount of force. Because so much of our lives in our bodies, we're using like kind of a cleaver for the job of a butter knife, or where we're using not enough force or something like this. And you're talking about being present enough that you can actually meet the situation with what it really requires, and not just with like a blanket statement or just an average way that you do things. And this is a creative process, a meditative and creative process that you're inviting people into.
Yes, that's so well said. And you really can tell that when you have multiple kids, because whereas one kid would need you to be like, I said no, please look me in my eyes, I'm going to take your hand now, the answer is no, right? One kid might need that level of strength, whereas another one, if you just kind of looked at them, they'd be like, sorry, mommy. There's these mild babies, and then there's these spicy ones.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I feel you on that. So just keeping that channel open so that you can actually respond to your person as they are, and not again with this just standard way. And I think that that's the efficiency of our brain, right? And how we're kind of programmed to just like, okay, let me just come up with the fastest, easiest way to like make this thing that I don't like stop happening.
Yes.
But there's another level of sophistication that can be developed around actually interacting in the world, like not even just with your kids, but in the world in a way that is, I guess, more subtle and actually like responsive, versus just a reaction that, shuts down this thing you don't like.
Yes, I had an example of that. I just met with someone, an acquaintance, and they sat down and they were talking a mile a minute. I'm really excited about this thing. It's going to be great. I really want you to get involved in it. And every biometric of mine started to like elevate, and my heart rate started to go up, and it started to not feel good to be in their presence. And part of that was because they weren't present. They weren't checking in. They're like, I'm so glad I just want to stay in touch with you. But they weren't asking me a single question. There was no pauses. And I wanted to get out of there as soon as I could. And so I resonate with that if she could have been more present and slowed down and cued into that sophisticated part of us that is like, what's the energy of this other person? Because her getting more and more hyped up made me want to go super chillaxed, like not ask her any questions. Like I was pulling back because we were doing this energy dance. So I hear you.
Yeah, that's a great example. I think that goes on all the time and we're not really aware of it. And there's so much to just becoming aware of that, like both parties being like, oh, wow, like I'm coming on really strong right now with my kid. Maybe that's part of what's not working. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing such your beautiful story, your expertise. I would know that this has been so beneficial for all of my listeners to hear. This is actually the first talk I've had with a parenting expert, but it's such a huge, major part of our own development. And then if we have children or we're interacting with children, it's part of the future of the world's development.
We're changing the world.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Do you have any last words for our listeners?
I'm just really proud of you. I'm proud that you would take the time to educate yourself and lean into self-reflection, and which makes you show up as an intentional parent. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. We'll catch up with you sometime again soon. And yeah, thanks again for coming on and sharing all your beautiful gifts.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to the Free Your Soma podcast. To find out more information about today's guest, check the show notes. And to find out more information about me, Aimee Takaya, and the Radiance program, visit www.freeyoursoma.com.